Hey, my beautiful family. Welcome to A Story a Day, bring you powerful and deeply loving story. The billionaire is beating my mama. The janitor's daughter cried to the bikers what happened next. Part 1. The Broken Silence. The morning sunlight spilled through the narrow windows of Brooksville Private Academy, painting streaks of gold over the polished floors. The halls were silent except for the faint hum of a floor buffer and the soft scraping sound of a mop. Grace Miller, the school's janitor, moved quietly through the corridor, her faded uniform slightly wrinkled, her eyes tired yet kind. Every morning before dawn, she came to clean the classrooms before the wealthy children of the elite arrived, sons and daughters of CEOs, politicians, and billionaires. But today, her hands trembled more than usual. She hadn't slept much last night. Her daughter, Leela, only 10 years old, had woken up crying again from the nightmares. Grace had held her, whispering promises that everything would be okay even though she didn't quite believe it herself. Grace wasn't always a janitor. Once, she was married to Robert Hayes, a rising construction manager who had dreams of building his own company. But when he left her for another woman, Grace's world fell apart. Bills piled up, the house was lost, and she ended up in a one-room apartment on the poorer side of town. Still, she never complained. Not once. All she wanted was to give her daughter a chance to study in a good school, to break the cycle of hardship. And that's how she ended up here mopping floors for the same billionaire families who looked down on her. By 7:30 a.m., the academy came alive with the sound of students. Expensive cars lined up outside, black sedans, silver sports cars, engines purring like tamed beasts. Kids stepped out in crisp uniforms and polished shoes, holding phones that cost more than Grace's entire monthly salary. Among them was Ethan Caldwell, son of billionaire Maxwell Caldwell, the man who practically owned half the city. The Caldwell family's donations kept the academy's name shining on every brochure. Ethan was handsome, confident, and spoiled, the kind of boy who thought the world owed him everything. Grace kept her head down as she wiped a spill near the main entrance. She heard laughter. A group of students was walking by Ethan, Tyler, and Chase, mocking a smaller boy who had dropped his books. "Hey, look." Ethan smirked. The charity case lost his homework again. Laughter followed. Grace's hand tightened around her mop. She wanted to say something, but she knew better. Getting involved would only draw attention, and attention from these families was dangerous. At p.m., school was over. Grace's shift, however, was not. She stayed late to clean the gymnasium after the after-school basketball practice. Leela sat quietly in a corner, drawing in her sketchbook. Her eyes followed the players on the court, especially Ethan, who played like the gym belonged to him. Leela wasn't supposed to be there. School rules forbade children of staff from staying after hours, but Grace had no one else to watch her. That's when Maxwell Caldwell entered the gym. He was tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit, with a face that carried both charm and coldness. People said he could close billion-dollar deals with a smile and destroy lives with the same ease. "Grace," he called, his voice smooth but command a word. Grace set down her mop and hurried toward him. "Yes, sir. I've noticed some complaints from the board," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. Apparently, the supply closet was left unlocked. If students get in there, it becomes a liability issue. You understand? "Yes, sir. I'll make sure it's locked," she said quickly, his downcast. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "Good. You're a hard worker, Grace. But remember, you work for the Caldwell Academy. Mistakes reflect poorly on us." She nodded, swallowing her anxiety. As he walked away, she exhaled shakily. Something about the way he looked at her made her stomach twist. That evening, as Grace finished up, she found an envelope taped to her locker. Inside was $500 in cash. No note. Her hands trembled. Was it a mistake? Or was it from Maxwell Caldwell? That night, the rain poured hard over their small apartment. Grace sat at the kitchen table, staring at the money while Leela ate her dinner, instant noodles and eggs. "Mama, you look worried," Leela said softly. Grace smiled faintly. "Just tired, honey. Go wash up. It's bedtime soon." When Leela left the room, Grace folded the bills and hid them inside an old biscuit tin. She didn't trust it, but she couldn't afford to refuse it either. The next day, things grew darker. Grace was called to the Caldwell mansion. The mansion stood on a hill, surrounded by tall iron gates and marble fountains. She had been there a few times for cleaning work, but always supervised. This time, Maxwell had called her directly. "Come to the estate at PM alone." That was all the message said. She didn't want to go, but she couldn't refuse. Losing her job would mean losing Leela's school admission. When she arrived, a maid led her inside. The mansion was eerily quiet, only the ticking of a distant clock and the sound of thunder outside. Maxwell waited in his study, glass of whiskey in hand. "Grace," he said, smiling faintly, "thank you for coming. Have a seat." She stayed standing. "Is there something wrong at work, sir?" He chuckled. "Relax. You've done nothing wrong. I just wanted to thank you for your hard work. Few people appreciate the value of quiet loyalty." Grace didn't know how to respond. He poured himself another drink. "You're raising a daughter alone, aren't you? That's admirable." "Yes, sir," she said cautiously. "She's all I have." He walked closer. "It must be hard. No husband to support you." "Relax," he whispered. "I just want to help you. I can make sure your daughter never worries again." She stepped back. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't need." Suddenly, his expression changed. The charm vanished, replaced by cold fury. "You think you're too good for me?" he snapped. "A janitor?" Grace's fear turned to terror. He slammed the glass onto the table, shattering it. She tried to leave, but he grabbed her arm hard. "Don't walk away from me," he shouted, shoving her back. She hit the edge of the desk, pain shooting through her ribs. Tears filled her eyes. "Please stop." That's when the door burst open. Leela stood there, drenched from the rain, clutching her school bag. "Stop hurting my mama," she screamed. Maxwell froze. Grace gasped. "Leela, how did you?" "I followed you," the little girl cried. "You didn't come home." "Got scared." Maxwell's face twisted in anger and shame. "Get that brat out of here," he yelled. Grace pulled Leela close and backed away, shaking. "We're leaving." As she ran out into the storm, barefoot and bleeding, Leela sobbed against her chest. "Mama, are you okay?" Grace whispered through tears. "We're okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't, because the billionaire wasn't done with them yet. 2 days later, as Grace mopped the empty hallway, she noticed something strange, people whispering, glancing at her, then looking away. The principal avoided eye contact. Her locker was locked with a new padlock, one she didn't put there. When she went to the office to ask, the secretary said stiffly, "You've been suspended pending investigation." Grace's world stopped. "What? Why?" "Mr. Caldwell filed a complaint. He says you stole money from the academy." Her legs gave out. "That's not true. He gave me But the secretary's eyes were cold. "You'll have to clear it with the police." Leela waited outside the school gate, clutching her bag, watching her mother cry for the first time in her life. That evening, as they walked home in silence, a group of bikers roared past on the street, loud engines cutting through the quiet night. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his neck, slowed down as he saw Leela and Grace walking barefoot in the rain. He parked his bike near them. "You okay, ma'am?" Grace shook her head. "Please, just leave us alone." But Leela suddenly burst into tears and pointed back at the road. "The billionaire, he's beating my mama." The biker froze, confusion and anger flashing across his face. "What did you say, kid?" Leela sobbed, clinging to her mother's skirt. "He hurt her, Mr. Caldwell. He hurts her, and now he says she stole from him." The man looked at Grace, saw the bruises on her arms, the fear in her eyes, and something in him snapped. He turned to the other bikers who had stopped behind him. "Boys," he said in a low voice, "we've got a problem to fix." "Relax," he whispered. "I just want to help you. I can make sure your daughter never worries again." She stepped back. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm grateful for your kindness, but I don't need." Suddenly, his expression changed. The charm vanished, replaced by cold fury. "You think you're too good for me?" he snapped. "A janitor?" Grace's fear turned to terror. He slammed the glass onto the table, shattering it. She tried to leave, but he grabbed her arm hard. "Don't walk away from me," he shouted, shoving her back. She hit the edge of the desk, pain shooting through her ribs. Tears filled her eyes. Please stop. That's when the door burst open. Leela stood there, drenched from the rain, clutching her school bag. Stop hurting my mama, she screamed. Maxwell froze. Grace gasped. Leela, how did you? I followed you, the little girl cried. You didn't come home. Got scared. Maxwell's face twisted in anger and shame. Get that brat out of here, he yelled. Grace pulled Leela close and backed away, shaking. We're leaving. As she ran out into the storm, barefoot and bleeding, Leela sobbed against her chest. Mama, are you okay? Grace whispered through tears. We're okay, baby. We're okay. But they weren't. Because the billionaire wasn't done with them yet. 2 days later, as Grace mopped the empty hallway, she noticed something strange, people whispering, glancing at her, then looking away. The principal avoided eye contact. Her locker was locked with a new padlock, one she didn't put there. When she went to the office to ask, the secretary said stiffly, "You've been suspended pending investigation." Grace's world stopped. What? Why? Mr. Caldwell filed a complaint. He says you stole money from the academy. Her legs gave out. That's not true. He gave me But the secretary's eyes were cold. You'll have to clear it with the police. Leela waited outside the school gate, clutching her bag, watching her mother cry for the first time in her life. That evening, as they walked home in silence, a group of bikers roared past on the street, loud engines cutting through the quiet night. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his neck, slowed down as he saw Leela and Grace walking barefoot in the rain. He parked his bike near them. You okay, ma'am? Grace shook her head. Please, just leave us alone. But Leela suddenly burst into tears and pointed back at the road. The billionaire, he's beating my mama. The biker froze, confusion and anger flashing across his face. What did you say, kid? Leela sobbed, clinging to her mother's skirt. He hurt her, Mr. Caldwell. He hurts her, and now he says she stole from him. The man looked at Grace, saw the bruises on her arms, the fear in her eyes, and something in him snapped. He turned to the other bikers who had stopped behind him. Boys, he said in a low voice, we've got a problem to fix. By morning, the Ironbows gathered in their old warehouse, a place filled with the smell of oil, rust, and memories. Jackson threw his phone on the table. The video played. The sound of Maxwell's shouting filled the room. Jesus, muttered Reed, the youngest biker. That's the billionaire everyone worships? Yeah, Jackson said grimly. And that's just one night. Cole crossed his arms. We could leak it online, get the cops involved. Not yet, Jackson said. If we go too fast, he'll spin it, say it's fake. We need solid proof, something that ties him to Grace's assault and the false theft claim. How do we get that? Jackson looked at Grace, who had come to the meeting reluctantly. He filed a police report against you, right? Yes, at Central Station. Then that report has to match with his mansion's security footage. If he really planted money or evidence, the timestamps won't line up. That's our key. That night, Jackson and Cole broke into the security cabin behind Caldwell's estate. They moved fast, quiet as shadows. Cole hacked into the monitor system while Jackson stood watch. Got it, Cole whispered. Security footage backups for the week. They transferred the files onto a drive and vanished before the guard's coffee even cooled. Hours later, back at the warehouse, they watched the footage. And there it was. Maxwell himself entering the janitor supply closet at 10:43 p.m. One day before Grace's suspension. He carried something small and metallic in his hand. 10 minutes later, he came out, smirking. That's it, Jackson said. He planted the money. Grace covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. He framed me. Jackson's voice softened. Not anymore, well, we've got him. But as they planned their next move, something else happened. A black SUV rolled up outside Grace's apartment that morning. 2 men in suits stepped out, knocking on her door. Miss Miller? One of them asked coldly. You need to come with us. Mr. Caldwell has filed an additional charge, harassment and defamation. Grace froze. What? No, I haven't. Before she could finish, they grabbed her wrists and cuffed her. Leela screamed, Mama. The neighbors peeked through their doors, but said nothing. No one dared defy a Caldwell. As the SUV drove away, Leela ran into the street, sobbing, Mama, come back. That's when Jackson's bike roared around the corner. He skidded to a stop beside her, eyes blazing. "What happened?" "They took," Leela cried. "The men from the Billionaire." Jackson didn't hesitate. He scooped Leela onto his bike, turned the throttle, and said into his calm, "Boys, Caldwell just made a move. Time to bring hell to his doorstep." They followed the SUV to a private holding facility owned by Caldwell Industries, not even a legal detention site, more like a private security compound. Cole swore under his breath. "He's keeping her off the grid." "Not for long," Jackson growled. "Gear up." Within minutes, six bikes surrounded the compound's entrance. The guards barely had time to draw their weapons before the roar of engines and the flash of metal chains sent them scattering. Jackson smashed through the door, storming the hallway. "Grace!" he shouted. Inside a dark room, Grace sat tied to a chair, her lip bleeding, her eyes terrified. A guard was holding a baton inches from her face. Before he could swing, Jackson slammed into him, knocking him out cold. He tore the tape from Grace's mouth. "You okay?" Her voice shook. "He said he'd ruin me. He said no one would believe me." "Then let's give them something they can't ignore." He handed Cole the drive with the footage. "Send it. Every outlet, every reporter, every cop in the city." Cole nodded. "Already dialing." "Run it." An hour later, the footage exploded online. The video of Maxwell beating his maid. The security tape of him planting money. A leaked audio clip where he screamed at Grace, calling her trash. Within minutes, #Justice for Grace trended across social media. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but this time not for her. Leela hugged her mother tight as the bikers formed a shield around them. Grace sobbed into her daughter's hair. "It's over, baby. It's really over." Jackson looked out at the flashing lights. "Not yet," he said quietly. "The real fight's just beginning." The Billionaire strikes back. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. The front page of every online paper screamed with the same headline: "Billionaire Maxwell Caldwell caught on tape assaulting employee and framing single mother." Clips of the leaked footage flooded the internet. The video had gone viral overnight, shared, dissected, and replayed millions of times. News vans surrounded the Caldwell mansion by dawn. Reporters shouted questions as the man, once seen as a visionary and philanthropist, hid behind his iron gates. But Maxwell Caldwell wasn't a man who surrendered easily. Inside his office, he hurled a glass of whiskey against the wall, shards scattering across the marble floor. "Who the hell leaked it?" he roared. His assistant, pale and shaking, stammered, "We were trying to trace the IP, sir. The source, it's unlisted, encrypted." "Then find them," Caldwell barked. "Find that janitor, and find whoever helped her. They think they can humiliate me. I'll destroy every one of them." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Grace sat in a small safe house. The bikers used an old brick building with a heavy metal door and the smell of gasoline in the air. Leela slept curled up beside her on a couch, her tiny hand gripping her other's. Grace stared out the window, eyes swollen from crying. Everything she'd endured, the shame, the pain, the fear, was now public. She didn't know if that was relief or terror. Jackson entered the room quietly, carrying a mug of coffee. "You should rest. You haven't closed your eyes in 2 days." She gave him a weak smile. "I can't. Every time I try, I see his face. The way he looked at me, I was nothing." Jackson sat across from her. "He looks at everyone that way. People like him believe money makes them gods." Grace's voice softened. "Why are you helping me, Jackson? You didn't even know me." He hesitated, then looked away. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" But before he could answer, Cole burst into the room. "Boss, we've got a problem." They followed him to the common room, where a TV played the morning news. Breaking news. Police have issued an arrest warrant for Grace Miller and members of the Iron Vows Motorcycle Club, citing allegations of extortion, kidnapping, and defamation of a public figure. Grace's heart dropped. "What? That's not true." Jackson clenched his jaw. "He's pulling strings faster than we expected." Cole turned up the volume. The screen showed Maxwell Caldwell stepping out of his mansion, flanked by lawyers and bodyguards. His expression was calm, too calm. "My family and I are victims of a vicious smear campaign," he told reporters smoothly. These criminals fabricated footage, edited lies, and tried to extort money from me. I have full faith in the legal system to bring them to justice. Grace shook her head in disbelief. He's twisting everything. Jackson slammed his fist on the top. Cole turned up the volume. The screen showed Maxwell Caldwell stepping out of his mansion, flanked by lawyers and bodyguards. His expression was calm, too calm. My family and I are victims of a vicious smear campaign, he told reporters smoothly. These criminals fabricated footage, edited lies, and tried to extort money from me. I have full faith in the legal system to bring them to justice. Grace shook her head in disbelief. He's twisting everything. Jackson slammed his fist on the table. He's scared. That's why he's trying to bury us under false charges. Cole glanced out the window. We need to move. If the police have a warrant, they'll be here soon. They packed fast. Jackson led Grace and Leela to the garage, where a black van waited. Grace hesitated. Are we running now? For now, Jackson said. Until we can prove he's lying again. But how? Grace whispered. He owns the police, the news, everything. Jackson met her eyes. Not everything. The van drove through backroads and into the countryside. Hours later, they arrived at a secluded cabin surrounded by pines. Inside, Jackson pulled out a box of old papers and photos. Grace watched as he laid them on the table. One of the photos caught her attention. It was of a much younger Jackson, standing beside a man in a construction suit. That's Maxwell, she said softly. Jackson nodded. Yeah, he used to be my boss. Grace's eyes widened. What? 10 years ago, I worked for Caldwell Construction, Jackson said quietly. I was a site foreman, hard worker, believed in him. Then one day, one of our cranes collapsed. 3 workers died. He blamed me, said it was my negligence, but it wasn't. The equipment was old. The cables were rusted. I'd reported it, but he ignored the warnings. Grace's breath caught. So what happened? I took the fall, lost my license, my job, my life. His eyes darkened. My brother was one of the men who died. That's why I started the Iron Vows. We swore to protect those the rich and powerful crushed under their boots. Grace stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. So this isn't just about me. No, Jackson said. It's about every person he's ruined. You just gave us the chance to finally expose him. Over the next week, the Iron Vows worked tirelessly. They built a network of evidence, testimonies from former employees, recordings, financial records. Grace, though frightened, cooperated fully. Each night, she watched Leela sleep peacefully by the fire, whispering silent prayers of gratitude that they were safe. For now. But Maxwell Caldwell wasn't sitting idle. He sent men to search, to intimidate, to destroy any trace of the bikers' refuge. One of his men, Dean, a ruthless ex-security agent, tracked down Cole's address. The attack came without warning. Bullets shattered the cabin windows one night as Grace screamed and ducked for cover. Leela clung to her, crying. Jackson grabbed his gun, shouting, and everyone out the back, go. Engines roared as the bikers mounted their bikes and scattered through the forest. Gunfire echoed in the dark. Cole was hit in the shoulder, but Jackson pulled him onto his bike and sped into the night. By dawn, they regrouped at an abandoned gas station. Blood, smoke, and exhaustion hung in the air. Grace pressed a rag to Cole's wound, shaking. They'll kill us. Jackson gritted his teeth. Not if we take him down first. How? She asked, desperate. He's untouchable. Jackson's eyes burned with determination. Not anymore. I just got a message from someone on the inside. That someone was Anna, the maid who'd been beaten. She had escaped and contacted the bikers secretly. When she arrived at their hideout, she was trembling, but fierce. I found something, she said, a USB drive. Maxwell keeps it hidden in his office safe. It's full of files, bribes, illegal transfers, offshore accounts. Enough to ruin him completely. Jackson's eyes narrowed. We need that drive. Anna nodded. But the mansion is under heavy guard now. You'll never get in through the front. Grace stepped forward. Then we go through the back. Jackson turned to her sharply. No, you're not going near that place again. She met his gaze, voice steady. I know his routines, his guards, his cameras, you need me. He hesitated then nodded slowly. All right. But you don't go in alone. That night, under the cover of darkness, they moved. The rain returned a cold, steady drizzle. Jackson, Grace, and Anna crept through the woods behind the Caldwell mansion. Cole waited nearby with a bike, ready to create a diversion if needed. Grace's heart hammered as they climbed the stone wall. She could see the window to the study glowing faintly. Jackson whispered, "You sure this is the right one?" "Yes," Grace whispered back. "He keeps the safe behind the painting, the one of his first building." They slipped inside quietly. Every creak of the floor sounded like thunder. Jackson moved to the painting, slid it aside, and found the safe. "Combination," he whispered. Grace nodded. 4317, his son's birthday. Within seconds, the safe clicked open. Inside lay stacks of cash, a pistol, and a small silver USB drive. Jackson grabbed it, slipping it into his pocket. "Got it. Let's go." But as they turned to leave, the lights exploded on bright, blinding, and Maxwell Caldwell's voice filled the room. Well, Lou came crawling back. He stood in the doorway, gun in hand, surrounded by guards. Grace froze, and gasped. Jackson stepped in front of them, growling, "Put the gun down, Caldwell." Maxwell smirked. "You think you can waltz into my house and steal from me again? I own the city, Reed. You and your filthy friends are nothing." Grace's voice broke. "You destroyed my life." He sneered. "You were just trash I gave a chance." Something in Jackson snapped. He lunged forward, knocking the gun aside. A shot rang out deafening in the marble room. They struggled, crashing into furniture. Grace screamed as another shot fired, splintering the bookshelf. Finally, Jackson managed to punch him across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Cole's bike roared outside, followed by the sound of a gas tank exploding. Firelight filled the windows. "Time to go," Cole shouted from the courtyard. Jackson grabbed Grace's hand, dragging her out. They sped through the smoke and chaos, escaping as sirens wailed in the distance. Hours later, at dawn, they stood by a quiet lakeside. The USB drive glimmered in Jackson's hand. Grace looked at him, voice trembling. "Please tell me it's enough." Jackson nodded. "It's more than enough. Once we send this to the feds, he's done." Grace turned to the rising sun, tears of relief filling her eyes. "Then maybe it's finally over." Jackson looked at her, exhausted, bruised, but unbroken, and for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he'd lost forever: peace. But far away, in his darkened mansion, Maxwell Caldwell lay in a hospital bed, face bandaged, eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself. "Not until she's gone for good." The final reckoning. The morning after the mansion raid was eerily quiet. For the first time in years, Grace Miller woke up without the weight of despair crushing her chest. The lake shimmered softly under a gray dawn, and Leela still slept, clutching her stuffed bear. Jackson Reed stood outside the cabin, watching the sunrise over the misty pines. In his hand was the silver USB drive, the last key to bringing Maxwell Caldwell down for good. Cole limped over, his arm in a sling. "The feds got our message," he said. "They're verifying the data. Offshore accounts, bribery, construction fraud, it's all there. This guy's done." Jackson nodded, but his eyes stayed hard. "He won't go down quietly. He'll make one last move before they take him." Grace stepped outside, wrapped in a blanket. "What if he comes for Leela again?" Jackson turned to her. "Then he'll have to go through me." By midday, news outlets across the country were running the same story. Caldwell Industries under federal investigation. Billionaire Maxwell Caldwell faces arrest. Leaked bank records, emails, and videos poured into the press. The world that had once worshipped him now turned against him. In the Caldwell mansion, Maxwell watched the news with shaking hands, his fortune, his reputation, his power all slipping through his fingers. His lawyer entered the room. "The FBI has issued a warrant. You need to surrender." Maxwell hurled the remote at the wall. "I don't surrender," he bellowed. "Not to them. Not to that woman." He turned toward the window. His reflection glared back, broken, furious, unrecognizable. "They think I'm finished," he whispered. "Then I'll show them what real power looks like." That night, Grace and Jackson were at the local diner, talking to Agent Rebecca Vaughn, the federal investigator now leading the case. She was calm, sharp-eyed, dressed in black. "The evidence you gave us is solid," she said, "but he's got private security, former military. He's unpredictable right now. I suggest you lay low until we bring him in." Grace nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes. I just want my daughter safe." Jackson leaned forward. "If he comes for her, he won't live to regret it." Rebecca gave him a stern look. "Let the law handle him, Mr. Reed." But they all knew Maxwell Caldwell had never played by the law. By midnight, the storm returned. Wind howled through the trees around the cabin, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Grace tucked Leela into bed and sat by the window, staring into the dark woods. Something flickered in the distance. Headlights. Her stomach tightened. Jackson. He came running from the other room. Was alert. Get her out of sight. Grace hurried Leela into the back room just as the first gunshot shattered the window. "Down!" Jackson shouted, diving behind the couch as glass sprayed across the floor. Cole grabbed his gun and returned fire. The roar of engines filled the clearing, black SUVs pulling up fast. Maxwell Caldwell had come himself. The front door burst open. 2 guards stormed in, rifles raised, but Jackson moved like lightning, knocking one out cold and disarming the other. Grace crouched low, covering Leela as bullets tore through the walls. "Jackson!" she screamed. "They're inside." "I see them," he shouted back, ducking behind a pillar. "Cole, flank left." Cole moved, but a bullet grazed his leg. He fell with a grunt. Grace ran to him, dragging him to cover. "You're bleeding." "I've had worse," Cole muttered. "Don't you dare die on me before this is over." Then the firing stopped. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of rain and the creak of the broken door. And then slow footsteps. Maxwell Caldwell stepped into the cabin, holding a pistol. His suit was soaked, his hair disheveled, but his eyes burned with manic rage. He looked at Grace like a predator cornering its prey. "You ruined me," he hissed. "Everything I built gone. You think anyone will believe you're innocent now? You're nothing without me." Grace stood, shaking but defiant. "You did this to yourself, Maxwell. You built your empire on lies." He raised the gun. "Maybe, but at least I won't die alone." The shot cracked, but Jackson lunged in front of Grace at the last second. The bullet hit his shoulder. He staggered back, gripping the wound, blood seeping through his shirt. "Jackson!" Grace cried, catching him. Maxwell aimed again, but before he could fire, a small voice screamed from behind him. "Leave my mama alone." Leela, trembling but fierce, had grabbed one of the fallen guard's tasers. She pressed the trigger. Sparks flashed. Maxwell convulsed and fell backward, crashing through the table. Jackson winced, breathing hard. "Good job, kid." Grace pulled Leela into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "You're so brave, baby, so brave." Moments later, sirens wailed through the storm. FBI agents poured into the cabin, guns drawn. They found Maxwell Caldwell unconscious, his gun on the floor. Agent Vaughn rushed to Grace. "You're safe now. We've got him." Jackson sat slumped against the wall, pale, but smiling faintly. "Told you the law would catch up to him," he muttered. Grace knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his wound. "Don't you dare die on me." He smiled weakly. "Not planning to. Still gotta teach your kid how to ride a bike." She laughed through tears, holding his hand tightly as the medics arrived. 2 months later, the world had changed. Maxwell Caldwell was in federal prison, facing dozens of charges: assault, fraud, tax evasion, witness intimidation. His empire collapsed overnight. His name, once gilded on every building, became a symbol of corruption and cruelty. Grace Miller was cleared of all charges and publicly vindicated. The academy reinstated her, but she never went back. She used her settlement money to start a foundation for women like her, those silenced by power and fear. She called it the Leela Foundation. Jackson recovered slowly, his arm healed, though the scar on his shoulder stayed a reminder of the night he chose to stand between a mother and her abuser. He visited Grace and Leela often, sometimes helping fix things around their new home, sometimes just to share dinner. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leela ran outside with her helmet. "Uncle Jackson, can we ride now?" He grinned. Only if your mom says yes. Grace smiled, leaning on the porch railing. Just don't teach her how to break speed limits like you. He laughed. Starting the bike, Leela climbed on, her laughter echoing down the street as they rode off into the orange glow of sunset. Grace watched them go, her heart swelling with gratitude. After everything, she'd finally found peace and family. Epilogue. A year later, the news covered a quiet event. Maxwell Caldwell found dead in prison cell, apparent suicide. Grace read the headline once, then closed the newspaper and looked out the window at the children playing in the yard, her daughter among them, laughing freely. She whispered, "It's over." Jackson, standing beside her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No," he said softly, "it's just the beginning." And together, they watched the sunlight stretch across the sky, no longer shadows of victims, but survivors who had turned pain into strength.